The mudroom door swung open before I touched it. That was the first wrong thing. I had locked it when I left for the hardware store that morning. Deadbolt turned, handle tested, the way I've done every single morning since my husband passed 5 years ago, and I discovered that checking things twice is the only reliable comfort left in an empty house. So when my elbow bumped the latch and the door swung inward without resistance, I stood on the porch step with 2 bags of sandpaper and drawer hardware cutting into my forearms and felt the particular stillness of a room that had been occupied without permission. Voices from inside my house mine for exactly 19 days. I set the bags down and walked in. My son was standing in the middle of the living room with his tablet propped on the windowsill, the screen open to some kind of floor plan application. Little gray boxes labeled bedroom and bath. He glanced up when I came in, the way you glance up when someone interrupts a meeting, not the way a person looks at his mother. "Oh, good timing," he said. "Come look at this." My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway of the master bedroom. She had a yellow, retractable tape measure in her hand, the kind contractors use on job sites. Her mother was sitting at my kitchen table with a travel mug she had brought herself, as if she'd known better than to use my things, or perhaps as if she'd expected to be here long enough that bringing her own made sense. A woman I had never fully liked and never fully disliked. A woman I'd maintained a polite fiction with for 12 years because she was part of the package. I looked at the 3 of them, at the tape measure, at the tablet with its little floor plan. "What is this?" I asked. My son set the tablet down. "We've been talking it through," he said pleasantly, as if that explained anything. "The layout really works well. The back room is big enough for both kids, and the sunroom could convert to a playroom. They'd have lake access all summer." He smiled. "It's a better situation than the apartment, Mom. It makes sense for everyone." My daughter-in-law looked at me with her chin tilted slightly down, the way she does when she's deciding which version of a response to give. "How did you get in?" I said. My son hesitated a half-second. "The mudroom. That latch is loose. You should really get it looked at." He was lying. I had locked that door. I knew I had locked that door, but I didn't say that yet. I walked past his mother-in-law with her travel mug, past the tablet and its gray boxes, pulled out a kitchen chair, and sat down. "I need everyone to leave," I said. "Mom." "Now, please." They went with varying degrees of grace. His mother-in-law gathered her things without a word. My daughter-in-law said she hadn't meant to upset me, her voice carrying that particular tone that means the opposite. My son tried to pause in the doorway, started to say something about wanting what was best for the family, and I held his gaze until he stopped. The door clicked behind them. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. Then I picked up my phone and called a locksmith. 35 years. That's how long I worked emergency medicine. ER floors in 3 different hospitals, double shifts, Christmas nights, the kind of hours that hollow you out and fill you back up with something harder and quieter than what you started with. I was not resentful of it. Nursing was mine. It was the one thing I held that was entirely separate from being a wife and a mother, and the person everyone called when something went sideways. My husband was an electrician, steady, funny, the kind of man who fixed things on weekends because he genuinely liked fixing them. We had 26 years before the cardiac event that took him on a Tuesday in October while I was finishing a 12-hour shift. Our son was 33. I was 57. Grief does a strange arithmetic. You calculate everything against what should have come next, and the numbers never add up right. What I did in the years after was move closer to my son's household, fill gaps, pay for things. It felt like love, which is why I did not examine it more carefully. When my daughter-in-law's photography business closed after 2 difficult years, and they fell behind on car payments and daycare costs, I wired $15,000 without waiting to be asked. When they needed someone to take the grandchildren on weekends so they could stabilize, I drove 40 minutes each way, every Friday through Sunday for almost 2 full years. I sat with those children through ear infections and bad dreams and stubborn homework. I showed up. I kept showing up. That was what I knew how to do. I want to be honest about this part. I made those choices. Nobody held a gun to my head. But I think somewhere in the years of making them, they started to look like a policy rather than a decision. Like a permanent open door rather than a door I chose to open. And the trouble with a door that never closes is that eventually people stop thinking of it as yours. When I retired last year, full pension after 3.5 decades, because I had been careful and deliberate about money in the way that women who grow up without it tend to be, I started thinking about the lake house. My husband and I had talked about it for years, the way you talk about things you intend to do after the kids are grown, after the mortgage is paid, after. The after kept moving. I finally decided it wouldn't move anymore. I found the cottage in February through a regional listing. Finger Lakes region, small and white with a screened porch and a dock that needed new boards and a garden that had gone half wild. I made an offer quietly. I did not advertise what I was doing. I mentioned it in passing to one person, my friend from church, casually over coffee, that I was thinking about lake properties. I didn't think that would matter. I would later find out it mattered enormously. That evening, after the locksmith changed the mudroom deadbolt and the front door and handed me 2 new keys, just 2, I told him when he asked about spares, I walked through the house. The sunroom smelled faintly of something that wasn't mine, a sweet lotion or a perfume, something commercial. I stood in the doorway and looked at the wicker chairs I'd arranged there a week ago and tried to remember if I'd left the throw pillow in that position. In the kitchen junk drawer, behind batteries and stacked instruction manuals, I kept 2 spare keys on a paper clip. One of them was gone. I stood at the open drawer for a moment. The one visit. The Saturday afternoon coffee and walked down to the dock. Their first time seeing the place. I had stepped away for maybe 12 minutes to take a phone call in the back bedroom. My purse had been on the kitchen table, unzipped. The drawer is right there. I took the remaining spare key, carried it to the back door, and dropped it in the outdoor trash can. Then I went back inside, washed my hands, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the water darken as the light went. My neighbor to the left is a woman named Bea, short for Beatrice, she told me the first time we met, over the low fence between our yards while she was deadheading her marigolds. 81 years old, walks to the mailbox every morning at 7. I liked her immediately, the way you sometimes immediately like someone who has no interest in performing for anyone. She stopped me about 10 days after the lock incident. I was carrying groceries from the car. "Your family's been keeping busy out here," she said, in the pleasant way people say things when they assume you're already aware. I set the bags down on the trunk. "Sorry?" "Your son, the young man with the dark hair. He came by a couple of weeks before you moved in, before you were out here full-time. Had his wife and the little ones with him. They spent a good while on the dock, walked around the yard, looked in the side windows." She tilted her head. "I thought he was measuring for furniture or something." I waved. He waved back. "Thank you, Bea," I said. "Have a good morning." I brought the groceries in and put them away one item at a time, slowly, because I needed my hands to be doing something deliberate. 3 weeks before I closed, before the title transferred, before I had any legal claim to the place at all, my son had been standing on that dock as if he were already calculating the distance from the water to where a table might go. I sat down at the kitchen table with a glass of water and stayed there until I felt steady. My daughter-in-law maintains a careful social media presence, curated, warm-filtered, oriented toward how things look rather than how they are. I had learned over the years not to take it personally. It's a particular kind of performance that people of her generation perfected, and mine mostly didn't understand. But when a former colleague texted me a screenshot with the message, "Did you know about this?" I had to sit down on the porch steps and read it twice before it registered. The photograph was of my lake, taken from my back deck. Warm golden light, late afternoon. Her filter had made it look like something from a lifestyle magazine, the kind of image that makes a place look like it was always waiting for you. The caption read, "So excited for what's ahead. These kids deserve every bit of this, so grateful for family." The comments were worse. Her friend asked which room was hers. She replied describing the light in the back bedroom and how the children would share it. She had picked which side each of them would sleep on. Another friend asked about the dock. Someone mentioned the fall foliage in the Finger Lakes. She replied with a heart emoji. She had taken that photograph during the Saturday visit, while I was on the phone in the back bedroom, while my purse sat open on the kitchen table 12 feet from the junk drawer. I scrolled back further, 3 weeks before closing, before I owned a single square foot of that property. She had posted, "Big things coming. Can't say yet, but so grateful to have people who look out for each other." 17 heart reactions. I opened a folder on my phone. I screenshotted every post, every comment, every timestamp. Then I went back to Bia's conversation in my head, and the timeline began to assemble itself with a clarity that made my chest feel tight and clean at once, the way cold air feels when you've been inside too long. My friend from church had mentioned lake properties to the wrong person at the wrong moment. My daughter-in-law's mother had connections through a neighborhood circle. Public property records in New York State are exactly that. Public. Anyone who knew which county to search could find a pending sale with a buyer's name attached. They had found it, and they had moved quickly. My mortgage broker called on a Thursday morning while I was pulling weeds along the front walk. A methodical man, careful with information. He'd walked me through every step of the purchase process with the kind of patience that reminded me of the good attending physicians I'd worked with over the years, the ones who explained things as if explanations mattered. "Marion," he said, "I want to flag something and I hope this isn't overstepping." I took off my gardening gloves. "Go ahead, Dennis." "Someone called the office last week. Said he was your son and that you'd asked him to help you look into refinancing options. He wanted the current loan terms and information about adding a co-borrower or moving the title into a family trust." I stood still in the front yard. "I didn't give him anything," Dennis said. "You're the sole borrower, and any account inquiry has to come directly from you, but I thought you should know it happened." "Please document the call," I said. "And if he contacts the office again, let me know immediately and do not engage." "Already noted on the file," he said. After we hung up, I stood there for a moment with my gloves in my hand, looking at the brass numbers I'd screwed above the front door the previous week. The brass was new and bright against the white siding. My name was the only one on the mailbox. My name was the only one on the deed, on the mortgage, on every document attached to that address. My son had called my mortgage broker anyway, claimed authorization he did not have, tried to pull information about a property that was not his, using my name as a key that didn't fit the lock. I went back to weeding. I needed another 20 minutes before I could be calm enough to make the next call I needed to make. The cameras had been installed the same week as the new locks. 4 exterior units, one on the front porch, one on the mudroom door, one covering the back deck, one angled over the driveway. The technician hadn't asked for an explanation. I'd said I lived alone and he'd nodded and gotten to work. For 3 weeks, I almost didn't check the footage beyond the initial test. I told myself the locks were changed, the key was gone, the mortgage broker was alerted, that things were contained. What made me open the app was the perfume smell in the sunroom. It came back faintly, 2 days after the lock change, and I knew I had not brought anything into that room that smelled like that. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up the archive. The front porch camera showed 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. My daughter-in-law's mother, I recognized the tan coat immediately, the one with the oversized buttons she'd worn for years, standing at my door. She tried a key, then a second key. She stood for a moment with her hand on the handle, very still, before stepping back and taking out her phone. 22 minutes passed. Then a van with a locksmith company's logo pulled up to the curb. A young man climbed out. She met him at the front path and pointed at the door. He walked up, examined the lock. The new one, the one that didn't match any key she had, shook his head, said something. She spoke back, gesturing. He shook his head again, more firmly, and walked back to his van. He drove away. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment looking at the front of the house. Then she left. I saved every frame, created 2 cloud backups, printed stills with timestamp. Then I called my attorney. My son texted 4 days later, "Can we please sit down and talk? Just dinner, no drama." I agreed. Because I needed to hear it directly. Needed him to say out loud what had been happening so that later no one could call it a misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law had set the table with cloth napkins and candles. The grandchildren were elsewhere for the evening. It was staged to look like reason. Before the first course was cleared, my son slid a manila folder across the table toward me. Inside were 4 apartment listings, all within 10 miles of their house. Each one was annotated in his handwriting. Good natural light. Close to a pharmacy. Low maintenance. 1 level. We've thought about this from every angle, he said. The lake house is beautiful, but it's more than you need right now. More upkeep than you realize. That dock alone is a liability. What if something happened out there and you were alone? He leaned forward slightly. If we came in on the costs and the maintenance, it becomes sustainable. You'd have a place that's easier to manage, closer to us, and everyone benefits. I looked at the listings. I looked at his annotations. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was watching me with her hands folded in her lap. You contacted my mortgage broker, I said. You told him I'd authorized you to ask about co-borrower options. He opened his mouth. You were at the property 3 weeks before I closed, I said, walking the yard, standing on my dock. Before I had a deed, before I had any legal claim to the place at all. I set the folder back toward him. Your mother-in-law came to my front door with copies of my key and tried to hire a locksmith to let her in. I have the camera footage. I have the timestamps. The candles sat very still. I'm your mother, I said. I know exactly how much I love you, and I know exactly what has happened here. I stood up, lifting the chair slightly so it wouldn't scrape. I'm not selling the cottage. I'm not transferring anything to anyone. I'm not moving into one of these apartments. What I am doing is having my attorney send a letter in the morning. My daughter-in-law said something under her breath. I didn't ask her to repeat it. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, said goodnight to both of them, and walked to the door. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and the radio off. When I got to the lake house, I turned on the kitchen light, stood at the counter for a moment just breathing, and then sat down and opened my laptop. The cease and desist letter went out the following Tuesday. My attorney had drafted it to cover the unauthorized entry, the key duplication, the contact with the mortgage broker, and the attempted locksmith entry with a third party present. It was precise. I read it 3 times before signing off. My son called once after receiving it. I let it ring. He didn't leave a message. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the county assessor's office. A clerk named Sheila, patient and slightly apologetic in the way of county clerks delivering unwelcome information. Ms. Marion, I wanted to reach out because someone contacted our office last week about the property at your address. They were asking about the assessment process and making some inquiries about co-ownership claims and whether the title could be disputed on the basis of a family trust arrangement. A brief pause. The deed is recorded solely in your name. We didn't move forward with anything, but our policy is to notify the primary owner when we receive this kind of inquiry. Thank you, I said. Please note that I have not authorized any contact from anyone other than myself, and please flag any future inquiries from members of my family. It's already in the file, she said. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The mortgage broker, the locksmith, the county assessor's office, each attempt documented, each one turned back, each one landing in the folder I kept in the desk drawer, growing thicker, its content becoming less about anger and more about clarity. I forwarded the assessor's information to my attorney and closed my laptop. Then I went out to the dock and stood in the late afternoon quiet until the light changed. The silence from my son lasted 4 months. I counted not out of bitterness, but because I wanted to be honest with myself about what I was choosing when I chose not to reach out first. I did not reach out first. The cottage needed the kind of attention that comes from caring rather than from urgency. The dock boards needed sealing. The garden bed along the south wall had been fighting weeds for years and needed a full clear-out before I could plant anything I actually wanted. The screen in the sunroom had a long tier in the corner that let in moths at night. I fixed all of it on my own schedule, in the order I chose, without consulting anyone. I found a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center in town, Thursday mornings, taught by a retired science teacher with strong opinions about brushwork and a calm patience with beginners. I was not a natural. My first attempts at the lake looked like something painted by someone describing a lake to a person who had never seen one. I kept going anyway. By the third month, I had 3 pieces on the sunroom wall that I didn't hate. A friend from my nursing years, we'd stayed close across 40 years and 3 different cities, came for a long weekend in July. We sat on the dock in the evenings with wine and old magazines and talked the way women who've known each other a long time can talk without needing to manage anything or explain themselves. She slept in Seek's room and helped me figure out where to hang the curtains that had been in boxes since February. On her last morning, she stood on the porch and looked at the water and said, "This suits you, Marion." I believed her because she had known me long enough to say it without flattery. My son texted in October, "Careful brief, hope you're well. The kids ask about you." I thought about it for 2 days before writing back. "I'm well. They're welcome to call." That was true. I love those grandchildren without condition or caveat, and that love is not entangled with their father's choices. But I was also clear with myself that the door to my life would not swing open on demand anymore. If he wanted to come back into it, he was welcome to, as someone who knocked and waited, not as someone who had already measured the rooms. A handwritten card arrived in November. He said he was sorry. The apology was vague about specifics in the way that apologies sometimes are when the person is more sorry about consequences than about actions. But the word was there, in his handwriting, and I acknowledged it. I sent back a short note, neither warm nor closed. Some things take longer than a season. This morning I was on the dock before 7. The lake was absolutely still, the kind of surface that holds the sky like a mirror. Every cloud doubled. The shoreline trees reflected so sharply you could almost believe the world had another copy of itself just beneath the water. Fog sat soft and low across the far bank. A great blue heron stood in the shallows 20 yards out, motionless the way herons are, doing whatever private calculation herons make before they move. I stood there with my coffee and thought about the other version, the one where I said yes to the floor plan on the tablet, yes to the annotated apartment listings, yes to the careful dinner with the cloth napkins and the candles, and the patience of people who had already decided the answer before they asked the question. I thought about what I would have given up, not just the cottage, not just the dock or the watercolor class or the morning fog, but something harder to name than any of those things. The right to be the one who decides, to stand somewhere without someone else measuring the room. My husband would have understood. He was a man who fixed things because he liked fixing them, and he always said the worst thing you can do to a house is let it sit without someone in it who cares. He meant that about houses. I've come to think he meant it about lives, too. I went back inside when the coffee was gone. The heron was still in its spot. I left it to its work. In the kitchen, I rinsed the mug, set it in the rack, thought through the day. A trip to the nursery for the tulip bulbs I'd been putting off. The Thursday watercolor class, a call with my friend who wanted to plan her spring visit. Small things, mine. My key hung on its hook by the back door. One key, smooth at the edges from handling, shaped only for this lock. No spare in a drawer. No copy made for anyone just in case. No backup passed along to someone who might need it someday. I know who comes through that door now. I picked up my jacket and walked out into the morning, and the air off the lake was cold and clean, and exactly what I had come here for.